So how are we going to do this?
It's been months, man. I thought of something, though.
Right.
But we need to kill a lot of people.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It does, doesn't it?
I like that.
I mean, a lot of people.
But to kill a lot of people, you're going to need a lot of people. So we're going to get a load of... Haha.
The Priest. This one is special to me. Little did I know that when I was a hardcore PvP bro in a different MMO, that when WoW came out and I saw all its cute cuddly features and I eventually got those 6 discs and spent a day installing them, that I was going to be a priest. A troll priest. In fact, I wasn't originally, I was a dwarf warrior, but when my friends joined me, they needed a healer. So, throughout vanilla, I was indeed a priest. So this legacy means a little bit more to me than most.
Why would you roll a priest? Healing, right? Makes sense. So when it was time to design the priest, it's probably holy that came first. Easy to work with, all the different fantasy priests out long before WoW. But what about other specs? If we look at the Disc Priest, it's one of the stupidest talent systems you can think of for a healer, especially in a fire that increases your own attack power. Now, some of you might know this, but I imagine most of you don't. But originally, Disc was supposed to be a melee spec. This is way before the game went live, but what you might not know for sure is that it was also supposed to be a tank spec.
Do you want to tank this DM North, mate?
Thought you'd never ask me. In a fire!
I'll just get a warrior, mate.
When you look at it like that, some other things start to make sense, like the huge amount of bonus threat that Mind Blast did, and the overall bizarre talents that lingered with the priest for such a long time. This was changed into something. Before launch, as the idea was scrapped, but it did mean that Dis was kind of doomed from the get-go. That being said, they randomly threw some amazing spells into that talent tree, notably the Divine Spirit buff, which all the healers craved, and of course Power Infusion, providing a huge damage buff to other casters. A buff so powerful that when I gave it to our best mage, he asked me not to do it. He would do too much threat, and it would mean he would have to AFK for longer periods of time than usual. In fact, he recommended giving it to our worst mage, so he wouldn't be so terrible.
So we're about to talk about Shadow in vanilla. Controversial, classic realms are coming, we know that. Shadow was really good for about a minute, and then they ran out of mana and went bad. Now, I played with one of the world's best Shadow Priests in my guild, and it was a joke. He was kind of the butt of all the jokes. He knew what he was doing. He knew when to stop casting spells so he didn't run out of mana and just mind flay and hope for the best. But I'm just pre-warning you guys. Shadow in Classic, dog shit. For raiding. Really bad. It was.
Shadow might have been god-awful in raids, but goddamn in PvP they were monsters. I remember my first encounter with a Shadow Priest in PvP ever. I was on my capped warrior, farming something in Searing Gorge, when a Shadow Word Pain landed on me, and then some odd blue lines started channeling into me. Even as I, a main priest, I had never spec'd or seen a Shadow Priest, as the message of how bad it was had been drilled into my head since logging in. But goddamn, my health was disappearing. So as a brave warrior, I intercepted in, popped Recklessness, a 30-minute cooldown no less. All the remaining coolies I had and went to town. As I watched his health bar not move a single centimeter, I couldn't help but notice how beautiful Shadow Form was. My god, the first time I saw that swirling beauty, I was in awe. For vanilla, Shadow Form was mind-blowingly gorgeous. I quickly found my melted corpse, relogged to my priest and spec'd Shadow for the first time. And then I remembered that I was a troll, so I looked fugly, with all the plus healing items, and I did no damage, and switched back to healer. The problem with Shadow is that the spells was just so damn expensive. Mind Blast in particular was crazy expensive on mana and also generated all that bonus threat, meaning you were not only likely to go out of mana on longer fights, but also present threat problems for the tank at the same time, while eventually just dropping to the bottom of the meters. With zero surprise then, Holy was the go-to. But before we get there, I don't just want to skip Discipline. I was actually the half-holy, half-dis hybrid for our guild. All healers wanted Spirit, and Divine Spirit was definitely worth, as was Power Infusion. As I mentioned, you could make a good player even better when it counted, and make terrible players okay depending on the situation. No one went full dis, but people never went full holy either, so it was a case of minor concessions for a good cause overall. The vanilla style always had these choices, which is why people crave the idea of being able to mix and match talent trees for these unique roles. Holy was the jam. It was considered to be the primary healer, especially Horde side. While the Alliance had Pallies or something that could give priests some competition, I guess, on the Horde side, it was all about the priests. The main legacy of the vanilla priests is that they were desired by every raid guild. It wasn't uncommon to see the addition of a new healing priest as a very awesome day, and I personally aimed as the priest officer to have 6 holy priests in the whole team, 4 or 5 per raid. But why? What was it that made them so amazing in comparison to the shamans and the druids? Efficiency. Raw healing efficiency. It's very hard for a current player to understand that the idea of AoE healing effectively was pretty much a recipe to being within a matter of casts. It was all about the single target heals. And not only that, but the single target healing spells that you had learned at level 40 or some shit.
We have covered down ranking before, so TLDR, basically, you use spells that you learnt while you were leveling, because they were cheaper and heal for less, and then you stacked on a lot of plus healing items, so they were pretty good when you were at capped. That's it. Use baby spells. Using max spells is a bad idea.
Holy priests had the most benefit from this down-ranking process, allowing them to heal for more and longer than others. With that in mind, they could keep healing while the other healers had to go and abuse their petty 5-second rule.
The 5-second rule, if you don't remember, is that you stop casting anything, you wait 5 seconds, and your mana regen acts as if you're out of combat. You literally stand still casting nothing. I'm playing the game right now. Pretty good.
The ultimate point of their superiority was the disgusting abomination Patchwork in Naxxramas. People remember Patchwork as the big DPS check, but it's often forgotten that the challenge on healers here was immense, as the sheer amount of damage meant that for a solid 5 minutes, there was no breaks to be had. Bring in the priests. I felt bad for the shamans at this point in time. Their function was to help out, but primarily be swapped into a group of 4 priests, drop their mana tide, then swapped in for another shaman to just do the same. All just to keep the priests comfortable. Luckily for the Alliance, paladins had similar levels of efficiency to get them through it, but them Horde priests, man.
That's all well and good, but really, the truth of a vanilla player? The crux of it all about being a priest in vanilla? Power. A lot of power.
In my vanilla stories, I told of the power I had, not only to get me, but also my friends into a raid guild, simply because I played a priest. But why? In modern WoW, if there's a spec with essentially a free pass, tons of people will play. But this wasn't modern day gamers. And there is a critical feature of the priest that I have left out until now. The most critical feature.
It was boring as fuck!
My God. You think DPS was boring, having to AFK while the tanks caught up, or holy paladins who just pressed one button? At least they could keep fucking casting. Holy priests, even into Nax, were victims to mana problems eventually. Even with shamans and druids feeding mana and paladins picking up the slack, it was some of the worst gameplay I have ever seen in this game. I could do an entire vanilla priest guide like this. Holla ballers, and welcome to your 1.12 guide for the Holy Priest. Now, what we're going to do here is target somebody, start casting a heal, but if they have full health near the end, jump. Cast the heal. Full health, jump. Cast the heal, jump. Okay? If their health should drop, let the heal finish. Now, this is going to cost you a lot of mana, so what you want to go do then is AFK for about 5 seconds and watch your mana refill. I get it. Some people love it. I don't know how, but I can say that with some level of certainty that many people did not. Especially watching all the other people get the glory for doing mad DPS and getting cool drops, while the traditional reasons that people never wanted to play a priest, such as getting all the shit for people dying, standing in shit, while simultaneously the person playing the priest wasn't even able to cast spells for half the goddamn fight. Actually finishing casts back to back was a scary situation, as it meant you were going to go out of mana. A total nightmare. Casting spells, one after another. Who can imagine being in such a situation? So despite the easy ride, getting priests was tough. The good ones who enjoyed it were quickly poached. Wasn't hard to get a name for yourself if you played well. As for the rest of the world, sweet Jesus. The spec attracted the most absolute worst of the worst. My guild once held onto a Russian priest for a year, all because they were a priest. And because of the language barrier and their unwillingness to learn what was going on. It didn't matter. They were terrible. But we kept them for every now and again. They wouldn't die and would actually do some healing. It was commonly discussed, and this is not a lie, amongst my priest circle of friends across my server, that several of them only played priests to get into a good guild, and then get good enough so that they could switch over to a DPSer when the time was right. Of course, many guilds would go on to refuse the switch, as they simply couldn't afford to give up on such a good priest. Perhaps the Burning Crusade would have the answers for this. Like many of the changes in TBC, it came from nowhere. Information was scarce, testing was hard to follow or understand. This was the first time we'd ever seen it. Blizzard promised changes, but details were sketchy at best, but some videos on Warcraft movies were starting to show up from the hardcore. I remember first seeing it on a Mulgar kill from the beta. All looked normal. Warriors were tanking. A mage tank, that's pretty fancy. What the hell is that? Is that a Shadow Priest? At the top of the damage? What's going on? Now, Shadow wasn't the only spec that suddenly found the dream of being viable, but they weren't just viable. They were strong. Extremely strong. By Gruul, most guilds were using 2 Shadow Priests. But wait, Perhaps these are the shittier guilds, who were okay with bringing whatever, and the pure classes in that raid were being played by scrubs. At this point, Nihilum, who were the kings at the time, released their 15-man Gruul video, and what do you know it, right at the top, a Shadow Priest. Muck, who as chance would have it, is seen complaining about how much threat he is doing alongside that damage, even after the fight has been going on for such a long time.
Shadow didn't go from being dog shit to cute little pupper. It became best in show.
Well, when balancing the Shadow Priest, what was the primary problem? You should remember, mana, obviously. Shadow was great for about 60 seconds in vanilla, but when they were they were done. So let's fix that. Vampiric Touch. I mean, reading the tooltip is enough to make you do a double take on if it's too powerful or not. This may be controversial to some, but in my mind, Shadow never had an actual problem with damage from the start. So adding yet more DPS spells as well as a Shadow Fiend sent them into overdrive. A well-played Shadow Priest, especially when multi-dotting was available, was only held back by whether the tanks could handle it or not. Now remember what I said in vanilla, plenty of healing priests didn't actually want to heal. And now, oh man, now the door was open and they were cramming through it. From personal experience, we had to find a whole new batch of healing priests because ours had either gone Shadow or missed the boat and re-rolled to something else. Shadow priests were here and they weren't going anywhere. And it wasn't just because of their damage. Let's go back to Vampiric Touch and that little extra bit of info in the tooltip. All party members gain 5% of your shadow damage as mana. Just how the hell did Blizzard think this was okay? Want to know how ridiculous this is? Look at this. This is me at Mulgore. A literal, continuous fountain of mana for the whole team. And this effect had gone on in the game for too long. Honestly, it was widely discussed that Nihilum's eventual loss to SK Gaming and the Sunwell was down to their non-acceptance of Shadow Priests. Although Muck was the most prominent Shadow Priest in the world, and Nihilum did use 2 Shadow Priests, which had become the standard, they gave them to DPS groups. The idea was refilling the mana of mages and warlocks would allow them to do more damage, less life taps and evocations and so on. SK Gaming, on the other hand, would give a Shadow Priest to the Holy Paladins and another healer. You might think this wouldn't be that much of a big deal, right? Trading one bonus for another, but at the cutting edge, this is a big issue. Amongst other things, it certainly wasn't a point of anger for their Holy Paladins when the race was over. They had been craving Shadow Priest support, and now the race was lost. So an easy fix created Shadow Gods. But what of the healing then? Holy isn't going to get much love here. Well, Holy did get one thing.
Voila! It's magnifique, no?
Priest something or other.
It's a light well, dude.
Right.
Look at it.
Okay, what does he do?
It heals you.
Oh, so you put... Oh, okay, so you put this down.
Yeah.
And then that's going to heal like what? In a radius kind of thing?
No. I put that down, right? And then when you're really hurt, it's sad. You just click it, and you get the most efficient heal in the game.
Stop. I click it.
You click it.
No. So what are you going to be doing if I have to sacrifice my DPS to click the light
Oh,
well?
I'm still healing.
So why do you need the light well?
Because it's more healing.
Is this because you're a bad healer? Is this a backup?
No, you're not listening. Let me start again.
Okay.
Right? It's got a big cooldown. I put it down. It's got some... Don't click it a lot, though.
Not a lot of charges?
No, it'll run out.
Right, okay.
Don't do that.
Okay.
People do that. Don't do that.
Right.
Once. I'm fucking serious. Don't waste it.
Okay,
this is the best heal in the game.
So to summarise, this is a very efficient heal.
The best.
The best healing
The
game.
best.
You use this as a cooldown.
Boom.
I have to come and click it to get healed with a big heal.
Thumbs up.
While you're healing other people. I'm not sacking my DPS to click your healing cooldown because you can't heal the fucking raid. Alright? Spec something else. Heal myself, that's a fucking idiot. What a dick.
I mean, it's just a right click.
This is TBC, plenty of dead specs to try and fix. It was solid already. They got some good spells to get away from spamming one over and over. Prayer of Mending, Binding Heal, Circle of Healing, all good. Exciting? Not so much. But this though, hello. It's still early WoW. There are so many specs that need fixing, and Priest was already in a good spot compared to some of the others. Hard to believe they would try and fix the second healing specs. So Shadow should have got all the focus, right? The only damaging spec. Yeah, okay, makes sense. But why this get this? Unreal. Let's remember that this is widely considered normal that classes had intended PvE specs and intended PvP specs. And it seems as though Blizz really wanted this to be the PvP spec. And that's what they did. Pain suppression was the ultimate cookie. 40% damage reduction in brand new arenas is awfully tempting, but it wasn't only that. They had the defining toolkit to be the biggest pains in the arse of all time. Old barely touched spells from vanilla mixed in with the new ones. The whole list is right in front of you. Mix that in with these insanely perfect talent choices. Crits increase healing, power infusion for emergencies, and what a package they had. In fact, for many, it was too much. It was in the hands of the highly skilled players that the true power of the Disc Priest was unlocked. So you might think it was the only healer or something, right? Who could beat this? No. If we look at reviews of the arena at the end of TBC, it was it's the easy comps. They were the more dominant. The comments on Rogue Priest, for example, are that they were easy to get started, but difficult to master. Especially when you're up against, I don't know, let's just say a warrior just derp stunning you endlessly without even trying, or trying to do something clever like a hunter putting Viper Sting on you and just draining your mana without having to, even stay in line of sight for more than a brief moment. The Disc Priest was the skill spec. No poison removal was their only weakness, but this allowed for legends to rise up through the ranks. No one gave a shit about who the best warrior druid was, rooting, cycloning, and stunning. But the Disc Priests? Deathing, CC, insta-dispelling innovates, amongst 1,000 other tricks. Those were the guys who became myth. I doubt I can mention the name Hydra to any WoW PvP fan without them knowing who I'm talking about, and it was TBC that brought names like his to prominence. At the close out of the Burning Crusade, Holy, Shadow, Dis, all standing tall and standing proud. But they weren't the tallest. People wanted Dis in PvE. They wanted Holy in PvP. They wanted Shadow to be able to, I don't know, AoE, I guess. Work was still needed.
I'm coming, my brothers. Alright, real talk. We're entering a weird space. Something I've never encountered in the Legacies before, because honestly I never really noticed it, as I doubt many players actually did, but once you go back you see it. In TBC they kind of lucked out with the changes, because they're all really good, and the gameplay was really good, and everybody was pretty happy, for the most part, specifically with Shadow. And what we're going to see is pretty much over the next decade, not much happens. And players didn't really want anything to happen. So it's kind of a weird space. So while we're in this weird space, I think it's about time that we talked about racism. And ladies and gentlemen, we are about to talk about racism. In order to keep it lighthearted, I'm wearing a pirate hat and I'm surrounded by teddy bears. Along with that, Andy is going to be here to regulate this discussion. If it gets too racist, he's going to give me the signal. This is the signal. Blizzard might want us to forget the dark times, the bad things they did, but we must never forget. Blizzard were the instigators. They brought WoW racism to the forefront. Priests, you see, in the history, all had different special abilities. Major lore characters were the forefront of the priest design, but there was too many. How to make this work? Each race of the priest got its own special abilities, and some of them were better than others. The dwarves, for example, had Fear Ward. When raid bosses were regularly fearing Nefarian and Nixia, you could fear ward the tank and they would never have to worry about it. No longer would that dragon turn and burn your entire raid simply because you had a dwarf priest. If we were to bring a night elf priest, that would not be the case. The Horde looked on with envy as more and more Alliance players all chose that dwarf priest. Chose it because of race, not because of how it looked, not because of how it played, but purely based on race. As we played and my troll with no shoes to start with.
No shoes is racist, right?
You're the judge.
Carry on.
He had no shoes, and he looked on at these dwarven priests with his shadow guard that did 193 damage should somebody have attacked me. A hex of weakness that barely saw any use, and a whole multitude of other special skills, they called them, that many races just didn't have. What did this mean then? Well, we're not going to bring the shit races, are we?
Wow! I quit.
This was a really big deal. Since launch, the bitching and whining about priest racials had been a non-stop bitter war. I was a troll priest, as many of you know, which was the laughingstock of the priest community, with the ugly dwarves sitting on their thrones of carrying terrible tanks on multiple raid bosses. But blow me, if my Hex of Weakness, which reduced healing taken, wasn't the target of envy and hatred when players found out it was useful on Alar Phase 2 in the Burning Crusade. That's right, one phase on one boss had people in uproar. I don't even think they changed this system because of balance. I honestly believe it was because people were so tired of feeling forced to play certain races. Can't imagine why. Let's start with Shadow. Being able to actually be a Shadow Priest was still somewhat exciting and fresh, especially for those who have been stuck healing through vanilla, and as you well know, the player base was still growing in Wrath, so many of those players were still around and thankful for their DPS position. But Wrath was when Blizzard looked at all those specs that hadn't had that TBC fix treatment. Moonkin, Elemental, various Rogue and Warlock specs that had gone ignored were all brought up to the starting line. Not only that, but they seemingly, every other spec was getting utterly fantastic new spells in their arsenal. Spell Reflect, Avenger's Shield, literal firework displays. And what did Shadow get? A new dot for one target and dispersions so they could join in soaking stuff. Not quite the same. Shadow, along with some others, were all collateral damage in the new homogenization model for WoW. In TBC, the mana battery was desired, fun, useful, and most of all, it was satisfying. That had been taken away, replaced by the replenishment buff, which could be provided by several others. The niche was gone. Now, don't misunderstand, the damage is fine, great even. Mindseer was as creative as a block of wood, but it did its job. It was just very similar to the way it had been for quite some time now. Sifting through hours of footage and more forum posts than I care to admit, it was easy to see that the Shadow world, for the most part, was content. For now. But they were certainly starting to think that the grass was looking much greener elsewhere, gameplay-wise. Similar story over in the Holy Camp. Less distinction, less niche. Priests up until this point had been defined not only by their power, but by racials, which each priest had some unique spell. Devouring Plague was one of those. Now that was being eliminated, baked in for the sake of convenience. The cool ones were just added in, and others were simply dumped. Guardian Spirit and the hymns were nice, but they only seemed to come into the game on the back of all the other healers also getting some sort of interesting raid cooldown. Just like Mindseer, Blizzard was seemingly plugging the holes in order to make everyone equal. Blurry face and non-distinct from its counterparts. Downranking was finally gone, and despite worries from some that this would cause people to lose their collective shit, it wasn't bad at all. Mana would quickly become a non-issue, as is the story for most expansions going forward. Dis, though. Dis. The rise of Dis in TBC meant non-PvP players craved it. They wanted it. Blizzard were not to deny their PvE little loves a little cherry. I truly believe the strength of Dis in TBC was a fluke. And some of the ideas they wanted to do with dissing TBC but never could were now given fresh attention. Penance, the new shiny spell with all the bells and whistles, was exactly what the PvPers wanted. A multi-use spell, damage, healing, burst, to once again plug the hole that priests felt they were lacking, and with the focus being moved to 3v3, it worked. RMP, or Rogue Mage Priest, is the staple of the arena. The Discipline Priest, the Bubble Boy, what was once a joke, a mock, the PvP spec. Now it was the most crucial member of the healing team. Only one was needed, 2 is too many, but none? That's a disaster. It must have been the skill spec, right? There must have been something amazing they could do, a style of play that rivals any and all others. Nope. Truth is, they were actually really, really stupidly simple to play. The most hilarious part about researching this period is that the harder the content gets, and the better players you get to see, the less and less spells get used. The big change was primarily the removal of the cooldown on Power Word Shield. That little tiny 8-second cooldown went down to 0. So 2 things are about to go into play. Overall, Blizzard wanted to make healing more interesting. At the end of TBC, raid damage had just become a constant, never-ending stream of damage, which had caused specs capable of just spam AoE healing like Resto Shamans to be overly represented. Now Blizzard liked doing that constant damage. It kept healers engaged. So that was staying, and even going to be the norm. So the classes must change along with that. In this new world of constant damage, imagine then for a moment being a healer and having to out-heal someone who can shield a whole raid and prevent the damage you need to heal in the first place. Fact is, you can't. Discipline priests were the best snipers this world has ever known. And as I said, the harder the fight, the more and more Power Word Shield was being spammed on everyone. And no other healer can contend with that. All they could do was heal the remaining damage after it had managed to break through the shield. That pesky weakened soul, though, preventing the target from being immediately shielded again, was the only thing holding them back. The path of least resistance. So many re-rollers suddenly appeared to claim this glorious flavor of the month spec. Some of them didn't quite get it though. I remember several trial priests trying to fill the spot and thinking that they were some kind of holy priests, trying to do heals and not just shield, 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 shield. Tut tut to you, my friend. The Lich King himself though, the big bad. He was the one that was to make sure every Dis priest understood their role in this world. The Lich King carried one of the most devastating raid spells ever devised. Infest. Infest is a spell not many people give the respect it deserves. Infest is a raid-wide dot. It starts small, and in a matter of seconds, it kills everyone. It quickly increases its damage, but it's even more devious than that. It's not dispellable or anything like that. It can only be removed when the player is above 90% health. But the moment it's applied, it deals around 25% of your health. What a complete bastard of a spell. If it's not healed up within 1 second, it's ticked again, for even more damage than it initially did. A second longer and it's even more powerful. So why don't players give it the respect it deserves? Dis priests. Just watch the raid frames. The solo hero of your raid, pressing that one button over and over and over again, holding that entire team together. What a legend. Let's keep the ball rolling. No surprises here, spamming shield was irritating many players by the end of the Lich King content drought. And Blizzard was very tired of healers just spamming and spamming and spamming and spamming heals all the goddamn time without running out of mana. So, they got fancy.
Problem numero uno.
Hit me.
People spamming bubble all day, getting a little bored. Wrath of the Lich King is passé. Alright?
Right.
Idea. Fresh off the throne this morning, just thought of it. Metson's not even in the know. Are you ready?
I'm just blowing my socks off. Hit it.
Right, so I thought, what if So Dis and Holy are a little different, and I've got something for Holy later. Back burner.
Right.
What if Discipline DPSs that also heals?
So you're going to be damaging. That damage is going to create healing.
Bingo.
Nice. So you'll do as much damage as another DPS class?
Can't do that.
No.
No.
So okay, then, so you still got a healer, so you're going to be... Well, you're going to be generating the same amount of healing as another healer.
Can't do that either, because it's 2 for 1,
Right.
but
But you're not a DPSer and you're not a healer at that point.
you get the idea.
I get the idea.
Because you can't have the top DPS being the top healer, right?
So what's the point in the spec then, if no one's going to pick it?
Little wings. I call it evangelism. Huh? Evangelism, yo!
You're getting worse.
I'm not getting worse. No. The whole thing is very priest-centric, right? People are going to be a little confused because the DPS ain't going to be there.
Neither's the healer by the sound of it.
No, but it's a bit of both. Yeah. If we call it Atonement, it sounds very cool. People like things that are cool.
That's true.
They do. What do you think? Think people are going to buy it?
I think people are buying to the idea,
Uh-huh.
but when I see you at the bottom of the meters for both healing and DPS, I'm probably not going to play it.
It's a fair point. But what if I was to use the word chakras?
Chakras.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you've got.
Religious as fuck, yo.
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
Stick your chakras up your
Chakras. Okay, wait. I have one more thing. I think you're going to like it.
ass. Really?
Kata was a very big deal. The idea of DPS healing was very inviting for some and off-putting for others. Imagine you're not the best player. That's okay. And just a few short months ago, you managed to get into an extremely good guild, getting all those mad gears you longed for, and you did it all by pressing power word shield over and over again. Then Kata comes along, and suddenly your shield is completely worthless. But now you need to track it for very specific times for mana regen. And you now need to maintain and track a stacking consumable buff in order to increase your healing and mana every 30 seconds by using previously unbound DPS buttons. And then you have to back all of those onto healing spells that are pretty much abandoned, but now they got better and went back, and this is like a holy priest now. And on top of that, you now have a raid cooldown. And people keep saying it looks like a boob. You were pretty screwed. The better players who hated shield blanketing embraced it, as well as those who saw some damn coolness this spec could be. The Kata Disc Priest was amazing to me, and for the first time since vanilla I was actually tempted to go back and be a priest. I often talk about moments of glory, something that a class or spec can do rarely, moments where the uniqueness of your spec suddenly shines and you get to do something incredibly cool. Dis even got that very early on. Targets that took increased damage, like Halphus Worldbreaker. It meant that as Atonement healing was based on your damage, then it also benefited from all that extra damage taken, and they became healing gods. If you raided in the utterly broken heroic 10-man world of early Cataclysm, you probably vividly remember that trying to raid without a Discipline Priest was just not going to happen now, was it? It's somewhat ironic that even though Blizzard was trying desperately to rebalance the healers out of the required or bring the player, not the class motto, that each and every time they really went for it, it never worked. I suppose we should mention Shadow. The only real complaint Shadow Priest had was that sometimes things died really fast and they haven't got enough health for me to dot them up, and that's not fair. So they gave them Mind Spike. Some nice options. Despite this, as new Shadow Orbs joined and shadowy apparitions making the whole spec certainly look much cooler, it's essentially still the same TBC gameplay. The old Shadow story goes on. Minor tweaks and twists, but keep it the same. Moving on then. WTF is a chakra?
In order to master the Avatar state, you must open all the chakras. And tell me everything you know about chakras.
What are chakras?
see.
The chakra idea went through a whole heap of changes before they finally settled on something, and as you're probably aware, they scrapped it entirely. The basic concept is pretty good. Holy priests were considered the jack of all trades, master of none, and they were living under the hairy testicles of discipline for a while now. Remember back when the TBC? There was still a large number of players who had been holy since the day the game launched, and no one was more pissed than they were that holy was turned into the unwanted spec, especially in favour of the derpy-ass bubble spammers.
I don't like this end. Hang on. No! Fuck off. I'm fighting back. Peace! I'm out. This rain shit.
One sec, stay there a minute.
No!
But how does Blizz do it? Do they remove some of the Holy's toolkit so they can buff other parts and give them their niche? That would only make people more angry, and besides, Dis basically had all the Holy toolkit as well as a baseline, and then they had all that extra cool stuff thrown on top of it, making it much more interesting. So chakras were born, a way of on-the-fly altering your playstyle to meet the demands of the encounter. At first, if you casted 3 single-target spells, then the game would change you into the single-target chakra state, and that is what you must be focusing on, right? Similarly, if you cast 3 AoE healing spells, then you would enter the AoE healing chakra state, as it must be the AoE damage portion of the fight, right? They also nicely included the DPS chakra for when you were going to be burning and turning on the deeps. As I said on paper, this sounds decent. In practice, though, not so much. Early testing showed that most often, by the time you had casted 3 spells back-to-back of the same type and actually entered the correct chakra state, then you might want to switch back over again. And healing in general is often a combination of different types of heals. Sometimes you need the odd single target, although you are AoE healing. It's not right to force players to cast 3 without breaking that combo. Eventually, they decided on just a straight-up chakra button. Solved. You press it, and the next spell you cast will determine your chakra. Not a very novel solution, but it did allow Holy to have some cool new spells and synergies to work with, but that 30-second cooldown! A blessing and a curse. Players take the path of least resistance. So most players would just use 1 chakra. Stick with it forever, like being in AoE healing state for raids and single target healing for dungeons. Going back to my Holy Priest guides in 4.2, I pushed heavily that you should learn to swap and manage your chakras at appropriate times to get the most out of your priest. But it was pretty clear the player base wasn't having any of that. In most occasions, people felt it was just too dangerous to mess around with, as you were punished in the alternates when AoE healing chakra and your single target spells were worse. Go single target and your AoE healing spells are worse. Too risky. That 30-second cooldown. If you ended up choosing the wrong chakra state, then you were stuck. You were stuck until the cooldown was over. Better not risk it. Stick with what you're comfortable with. I look at Cataclysm as the rejuvenation of the priest. The groundwork is set here for what we know of today. Shadow was certainly lagging behind, but the cosmetics, the ideas of orbs and apparitions, that's the baseline. This is the moment where those things came in. But would it take the pandas to take it where it needed to go? Oh, those luscious pandas and the bubbly, joyful times they brought us, and now it's time to really, really do something with Shadow. It was bound to happen with now literal years of minor fixes and iterations. The other classes were just advancing so much while Shadow just kind of sat there looking sad over the fence at the kids who got better Christmas presents every year, but it still doesn't change the fact that it worked. Shadow wasn't in a bad position at any point, but I guess we were all guilty of asking for more. Builder Spender was the most obvious choice. Again, a little creatively lacking, sure, but again, let's remember here, we're dealing with the classic argument. We like the way it is, but we want something else. But don't change it too much, but make it better. But not easy. Same, but different, but kind of the same. It's not easy, right? In the early beta of Mists of Pandaria, the idea was to generate shadow orbs and then spend them in one of 2 ways. It wasn't well received. Firstly, you could either use shadow orbs to psychic scream and CC someone for 3 orbs. 3 orbs equals 3 seconds. 1 orb is 1. Awesome, right? No. Especially when your other option was to spawn shadowy apparitions, which slowly kind of plodded over to the target and eventually did some damage. The Shadow Priests were in a full-on rage as both options were totally disappointing. One can only imagine being invested in PvP and you get to choose either to CC someone or do damage to someone a few seconds later than you actually need it. And the PvPers weren't exactly considering 3 while looking cool, but ultimately rather disappointing apparitions as an exciting new gameplay mechanic. Eventually, Blizzard decided that the safest way to do things was simply to keep things basically the same, which is what people wanted in the first place. Now the orbs would use Devouring Plague as a finisher, and on top of that, the new mop talent system allowed for really cool additions like procs, which the player could respond to and be rewarded with yet more orbs for more Devouring Plagues, which also opened the door for more interesting stats. For the first time since the Burning Crusade, that is now nearly 6 years at this point, the Shadow Priest gameplay was shaken up, but not too much, just a little bit. And it worked fine. Shadow had some new things to think about, and I'll say this every time I get the chance. The new and improved talent system of Mr. Pandaria also allowed people to add some cool new gameplay elements that added some thought and consideration to their play. Allowed them to be better, not just because they could cast dots on multiple targets. Mindflame's Sanity is a great example. Good players knew how to get that couple of extra little ticks out of that talent, while players who were still learning could still get like 80% of its maximum, which for me is fine. But boy oh boy, let's get visual. I remember casting Halo for the first time, and all I could think of was Star Trek. And whether you know it or not, I'm a Trekkie, and the voice inside my head every single time I pressed that wonderful little buttons was...
I have an energy wave at 240 degrees Mark 6 port, sir. Visual. My God. Shields! Shields!
Dude, do you remember Cascade? Cascade! Do you remember Cascade? You cast it on somebody, it split in two, and then that hit another guy, and then that split in two, and then it rained down on the raid like a golden... like a yellow sparkly shower.
The visual route is nearly always a great success, and there wasn't a person alive who couldn't appreciate seeing Halo or Cascade rippling through the players, bringing all the love and cuddles one could want. There's also Divine Star, which I can confirm is indeed a spell. It's functional, but it's no Cascade. It's not. Streamlining is the word I'd use to describe the Mop Priest. There isn't much here in the way of big, awesome, weird, and wonderful, but more playable for sure. Evolving is a good way of looking at it. The Holy Priest chakras to simply swap between the two, AoE or single, or having some setup for it. Disc Priest Atonement healing mixed with new Spirit Shell cooldown, barrier. It kept the identity of the spec, and they were both solid. You can find this great Jazz Rune video, solo healing, Paragon's first kill of Heroic Garrosh as a Holy Priest, and several other Disc Priests doing exactly the same. And while the feat was done by other healing classes, let's not forget who started it. It was that glorious priest. You try and find a 25-man raid without 3 priests, all of different specs. An RBG team without at least 2. We see it more commonly today. Sure, all specs of a class get some form of representation. We can have today Resto, Alien Enhancement, and so on and so forth, but it was the priest. Priest was the start. That's when it all began. It's interesting that one of the classes that arguably had some of the smallest and most minor of changes eventually hit its full stride after this long. Perhaps that's how long it takes to find the sweet spot. Perhaps their high representation meant that they were broken. Am I saying that the priest is perfect? The Mop Priest is the ultimate state? Would WoD wreck it? Could WoD make things better? Did it need making better?
Quality of life. That's what WOD's all about. It's the beginning theme for everyone. We're going to improve your quality of life. What the hell does that mean?
The intended idea behind quality of life improvements is to address things that have become needlessly complex, even if it's only by 1 or 2 steps. From a priest point of view then, a mop quality of life change was just swappable chakras. Why do I need to press the chakra button, then cast a certain type of spell in order to tell the game I want to AoE or single target heal? I mean, obviously, if I'm single target healing and I press chakra, it's because I want to switch to AoE healing, right? Why the multiple steps? So we streamline it. Problem is, how do you decide what is or isn't a quality of life issue? Where do you draw the line? Abundance of spells or the pruning is very difficult to gauge. For some players, having access to rarely used but niche spells is fine, as they add flavour, and using it at the right time can be very rewarding. On the opposite side, some players might feel as though having a bunch of useless spells that rarely get used is annoying. So what's the point in having them? I talked about how MOP had a very high representation in all cases. While some would make the claim that this is because priests were overpowered, Dis, for example, had no mana issue, so they could spam endlessly even when people were full and passively apply shields. In fact, just having infinite mana and spamming non-stop renews might fall under the cuddly name of blanketing. But let's face it, it's mindless spam. On top of that, Shadow Priest did have a fair point that being able to only have 3 Shadow Orbs, and 3 being what's needed to use them, sometimes orbs got wasted. That's frustrating and annoying. So improving those things would be a quality of life improvement, right? Having spells stripped away, especially from Shadow, was a big kicker. All the heals were gone, the old toolkit being buried away. Shadow Mend was a decent replacement, but many Shadows liked having the availability to help out their friends in need in more ways than one. Blizzard had goals, though. They had goals they had set. Once again, as is the running theme gameplay-wise, things were good, but they weren't perfect, always improvements to be made. So what were the goals with all this pruning, refining, simplifying, and so on? As mentioned with Holy, it was just a bit of encouragement for players to actually use chakras. They still couldn't get them there. Even after all this time, a huge amount of players just didn't like it. I don't want to risk it. It's not comfortable. So Blizzard made it better. They give them more bonus to their special chakra spells and less punishing to being the wrong way. Shadow could store 5 orbs. Makes for much better bursting and way less wastage. What a time to be alive in all this comfort and luxury. I'm so happy that it finally opened the door to dipshit dotless playstyle. What? Dotless Shadow. I can't speak for everyone, but my friends hated this. But it's one of those things. It's one of those play styles that players find out and then they become in the know. They know about something unusual that plebs wouldn't know about. Spamming Mind Spike and Instant Mind Blast to get fast orbs and dump them with some dots for Mind Flay. Rinse and repeat. It's pretty common that the weird playstyles people find in WoW are actually fairly simple. The path of least resistance once again shows its head, even if it's just a marginal increase. But hey, it was the most significant change to Shadow for a decade. What about their goals for Dis? Atonement's too powerful by the end of MOP. It works too well with the talents. Fair enough. A little nerf, and being able to put out massive absorbs like back in Wrath is something we really want to avoid, right? That would just be silly. We can't have that again. Instead, let's focus it up. Clarity of will. That's a good idea. That'll keep things in check while giving that classic Dis feel. Spamming and endless bubbles over and over. Avert your eyes, kids. This is going to get pretty top shelf. I swear if Clarity of Will had come in during Wrath, other healers would have thought it was a complete con, as the idea of heal sniping was still very fresh. But by what? Most healing teams consider it such a cheap spell, but useful that it was just kind of funny. But what's he doing now? What are those? Are those shields? It's happening again. Not again. Why? We've gone backwards. No! Once again, mana was an afterthought. And sure, this time there was evangelism to manage with some DPS spells and mixing in some other spells. But the bubble blanketing is back. We've gone the wrong way. Once again, raid damage had become a constant and unforgiving. So rise up, Dis. Rise up it did to protect its brothers. Once more. And just like before, history repeated itself. And for the final time, for so long in the sordid history of the Dis Priest players, bad players looked for their raid spot. And they flocked to the Dis Priest in waves to join the rest of the upper tiers in raiding. This isn't the end of the Priest story. Not by a long shot. Over the 13 years so far, we've seen them stand strong, fearless, powerful, dauntless. Each and every year, that brilliant white raid frame has not faltered. Along the way, they have lost some great things, and soon there would be new things. But that story is still being told, and so it'll be a story for another day. But know this when thinking of playing a WoW character. There will always be the priests.
Thank you so much for watching the Legacy video. I hope you enjoyed this one. We'll be having them coming out much faster now. And thank you to everyone on Patreon who made this so fun. Oh!
Stay there a minute.
No! I can fucking get you wallet now!
See you next time. Beers on Mike!